How's it going, everyone? Justin here with MyManjustins Collectible Emporium, and I'm your man for Pokemon cards, card analysis, and Pokemon investment consulting. Today I just wanted to do a video about Pokemon cards as a form of media, and I've talked in past videos about how to do analysis on Pokemon cards and therefore media in general, and I wanted to talk about a history of media itself, going from oral traditions to written media to electronic media, and then just talk about how Pokemon in itself is a form of media. Now, this might be kind of a shock to some people because most people, when they think of media, they're probably going to think of the news or a newspaper or a magazine and not have a more general view of media. And I think it's actually really beneficial to people to have a more general view of media, because then you can actually understand the world you live in much more and on a much deeper level. Now, I mentioned Marshall McLuhan in a prior video and his seminal work, The Medium is the Message. And I talked about the example of the fish being immersed in water, being the medium that sustains it and largely unaware of it. And that actually isn't what The Medium is the Message is about. I was just giving you an example. His idea of the medium itself being the message is a really interesting idea that is about basically, instead of analyzing the content of the media, like for example, this Charizard and Reshiram, you would actually analyze the material that it's on, this cardboard, holographic, technology that allows this shiny textured surface, and you would actually do analysis on that in itself. And this kind of analysis is really interesting because when we go back to the original media form, the original form of media, the medium for media, was actually the air between people, because originally there was no written media. The first form of media was the air between us because there was only oral traditions. And the interesting thing about the medium being the message is that you can actually tell about the culture, the medium being the air in between them that carries the message, which is the reverberations in the medium, the air between people that carries the media, being words. So when you actually examine that, the medium being the air, you can actually understand the overall culture a little better. And it's interesting because in oral cultures, they were more rigid, and that was because things weren't allowed to be written down and remembered. You had to rely on some kind of authority within the group to remember all of the information for the tribe, for example, they were in, and therefore the air being the medium for the media shaped the culture. And that's kind of the idea of Marshall McLuhan's The Medium is the Message, and that can be carried on to electronic culture as well. How the medium is actually electrical signals passing through that carries information through electrical signals, and then we're able to see that, for example, on the screen that you're looking at right now is just a bunch of electrical signals that can put together a picture of me, and there's the audio signals that allow you to hear. So it's kind of a mixture because the medium of air is carrying the words that I'm saying, and the screen portrays the visual digital medium. So as I mentioned, the first epoch of media is oral tradition and oral culture. Then it became a written culture. People started to figure out how to use parchment and vellum, which is animal skin, to write down. And also, actually, before that, the Sumerians started using clay tablets. So they were still using something tangible to pass a message to people. And that there is the essence of media. Anything that you can communicate a message with tangibly and pass it to another person to be able to transduce the message themselves is a form of media. So when we think of media like that, we can think of a thing like a flag too. A flag is a form of media, and like I mentioned last time, media texts are polysemic. So when I say, here's a Gengar for you, this is how I feel about you, take this Gengar, that's going to have a whole kind of different messages in it. And based on a relationship and your understanding of Pokemon, your understanding of Gengar, and all these things in our own relationship, you'll be able to transduce it individually, and that'll be based on that individual interaction between those two people. So that is the second epoch of media history, is written communication. The next epoch of, and I'll go back, interestingly, with media history, new media technologies pretty much always precede revolutions. There's actually, I said it went from written to electronic. There's actually print. It went written and then to print. And for example, talking about revolutions for media, when the print epoch came about, this was seen first in the Gutenberg printing press. So during this time, this was in Germany, and this guy Gutenberg wanted to be able to print and do written media faster and be able to disseminate it to a wider audience. And that is how the Gutenberg printing press was developed. And what happened when the Gutenberg printing press was developed is this kicked off an entire revolution. At this point in history, there was a major centralized information institution. In this case, it was the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church basically was the centralized form of information and culture. All culture disseminated from a centralized source. They had control of the media. In this case, the prime form of media in this culture would have been the Bible. So what happened is when the printing press, the Gutenberg printing press, was developed, they basically were able to disseminate Bibles, in this case, the form, which is another form of media, to the mass public. And what this did is it kicked off a whole revolution, because instead of from one source, centralized source of information from one place to everyone, it changed. People were able to have their own forms of media, and instead of a centralized source, it was a bunch of different decentralized sources of information, and people realized they could just go to the source of media themselves, make up their own ideas. And what this did, I would say, is it kicked off an idea of individualism, the idea of individualism. So that is an example of how media changed a culture through a new media technology, Gutenberg printing press, through a new cultural idea, individualism. And that period of history was known as the Protestant Reformation. The idea is that a bunch of people protested the Catholic Church. They said, we want to have our own deal. We don't want to go to you for information. We just want to have our own thing, have our own family units. Individual family units became the sources of information. They were like a bunch of nodes in society rather than having a big centralized, powerful force. And that was called the Protestant Reformation, and it kicked off a 30-year war. That led to the Enlightenment period. After the Enlightenment period came the founding of the United States, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, another form of media, and the rest is history since that. So now the next form of media that came about after that was the electronic media, and that is the epoch that we're in right now. And it's interesting that the new media technology that is now available to the public is social media. And what's going on right now, there's quite a revolution going on right now, and it's the same idea that happened during the Protestant Reformation and the dissemination of Bibles with the Gutenberg printing press. It's another revitalization of individualism, because it's the same idea is happening. Before the social media revolution, basically there was a centralized source of information with the mainstream media. They were the prime centralized source of information for culture, and all information was disseminated from the centralized source to the people. And what things like YouTube did, for example, which is what I'm using right now, is it caused the same thing to happen as that time. What happened is people started creating their own sources of information, and again, we have a bunch of different individual nodes in society giving various diverse and various perspectives of news that can contrast the mainstream narratives and give more individual, localized perspectives of information. And again, this is kind of kicking off another culture of individualism and individual thinking. So again, So new media technologies precede cultural revolutions, and it's literally happening almost the same way as with now. So that's what we're seeing again with this new electronic media revolution. So now we go back again to Pokemon cards. The Pokemon card revolution did actually kick off a kind of revolution in itself as well. And this is kind of what I've been trying to point at in these past videos on metaphysics and philosophy of Pokemon, is that they kind of combined. So we have this this kind of print written culture of media on these cards, and they're a bit different than, for example, trading cards in basketball and baseball cards, because they kind of combine this idea of culture and mythology and aspects of reality and life. The spheres of influence is what I've argued the Pokemon represent, and they created these artistic forms that for some reason it just totally intrigued all of us. It became an absolute phenomenon when it was released, and it continues to this day and is becoming more and more popular. And I think there is a very real reason that we have this affinity toward these these artistic media forms, is because they combine so many different ideas within media. They're actually very complex media forms because they integrate these different forms of mythology, of culture, of art, of the spheres of influence in life, and they use these brilliant abstractions of Pokemon in these art forms to represent these different things, and we are just intrigued by them, and I think people just kind of take for granted why we are so interested in these. Why is it that Pokemon are so popular? And by the way, this is the complete secret rare set of Cosmic Eclipse. I thought it was cool to see all the cards in a little set. The character secret rare, the character Pokemon, and I think it's just something interesting for us to think about, is why we have such an affinity for these, why these became such a cultural phenomenon. And this just goes back to what I was saying about the analysis of these. And I think what's beautiful about them is that they are a true art, and they allow us to use our imaginations when we look at them. There's nothing implicit within them that is going to cause us to think a certain way. We are totally free to interpret these based on our own experiences and dispositions and affinities and understandings, and we can analyze them exactly as we will, and we have our own freedom to collect the ones that we have the most affinity to. And there is various ways to analyze these Pokemon and break down, and it's interesting to see which ones people have the most kind of affinities to. And I think Gengar is one that is a very popular Pokemon in general. Blastoise, another one, and of course Charizard. And I've talked about the reason I think Charizard is because the idea of the dragon is a really old mythological concept that has been around pretty much forever, and it's the idea of that which is ferocious before us, that guards something valuable, that for those who want to embark on that archetypal hero's journey, the path of the hero, must contend with, and that's kind of the story with all the Pokemon, I think, is that they all represent, for example, Gengar here is the shadow Pokemon. And it's interesting, the idea of the shadow is, physically speaking, because I studied a little bit of physics at UC Berkeley as well, mostly cosmological physics though, the idea of a shadow, the shadow isn't something in itself, it's actually the privation of something, it's the privation of light. So it's not, you can't call a shadow real, because what you're doing is you're reifying a posterior attribute of something else, being light. It's an attribute of the absence of light. An attribute is not something. So that's something interesting in itself. But the idea of the shadow, so if we take that into context and we understand that that what Gengar is that which is when light is not there. And I think it's accurate to represent Gengar as something very menacing looking and very haunting, which it comes from haunter and ghastly. And so light being something that illuminates us, it's something that can illuminate paths, for example, and that has another connection to the idea of the hero's journey. The hero must have a path to go on, so without having light, he can't see his path, and therefore all there's going to be before him is Gengar. So I think that's something really interesting, and that's something that we can go really deep on with each individual Pokemon. If you have any interpretations that you want to share when you see something like Blastoise or Charizard, feel free to leave it in the comments what it makes you think about in terms of how you experience existential reality. Feel free to share that in the comments. So that's it for today. I have a new collection coming in this week, so I will do a video on that. I'll do some analysis of the cards, and I'm also going to do a video on Hidden Fates. One of the subscribers had a great idea to talk about the potential reprints of Hidden Fates. I haven't looked into this a lot, but one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Terapeak research with eBay, and I'm going to see how much it affected the X and Y sets that got reprinted. Like, for example, that Shaman card that was really popular. I remember that card was like it was like $100 card in a PSA 9, or I think maybe 10. I think it was in just a 9. It was like a $100 card, that full art Shaman. And once it was reprinted, the PSA 9 became like a $20 card. So that's an 80% decrease after the reprint. So I'll do a video on that so we can see, then I'll try to find out how much it will be reprinted. But all in all, I hope they don't reprint it. It won't be good for the collectors. It will devalue the cards and kind of just be a money grab for the Pokemon company. So hopefully that doesn't happen. I don't know if it already has happened. Like I said, I haven't researched it, but that's something I'll do, and I'll do a video on that as well. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you on the next broadcast. Thanks.